I work for the Department of Records Reconciliation. It's a smaller division than most people realize exists. Housed in a renovated warehouse on the eastern edge of the city, accessible only through a secured entrance and a series of procedural checkpoints. My job is to verify that all archived photographs match their corresponding intake documentation. It's methodical work. It requires patience and attention to detail. I've been doing it for 11 years. The warehouse itself is unremarkable from the outside. Gray concrete walls, small windows positioned too high to see through. A single entrance marked with a small bronze plaque that reads, Department of Records Reconciliation, authorized personnel only. Most people drive past it without noticing. Most people have no reason to know that such a department exists. Inside, the warehouse has been converted into a maze of filing systems, climate-controlled storage units, and verification workstations. The main office occupies the ground floor, a grid of desks arranged in neat rows. Each desk equipped with a computer terminal, a document scanner, and a photograph viewer. The lighting is fluorescent and consistent throughout. The temperature is maintained at exactly 68 degrees. The humidity is controlled to prevent damage to archival materials. I've worked here long enough that I don't notice these details anymore. They're just the environment, the context in which I perform my function. My workstation is in the northeast corner of the floor. It's identical to every other workstation except for the small photograph I keep in a frame beside my computer. It's a picture of me from college, taken approximately 23 years ago. I don't look much like that person anymore. The version of me in that photograph seems younger and more certain about things. But I keep it there anyway, as a reference point, as something to anchor myself to when the days start to feel identical. The work itself is straightforward. A batch of photographs arrives from a closed institution or organization. The photographs come with documentation, intake forms, admission notes, discharge summaries. My job is to verify that the photograph matches the form, that the person in the image corresponds to the name on the documentation, that all required information is present and complete, that there are no discrepancies between the visual record and the written record. I process between 50 and 100 photographs per day, depending on the complexity of the batch. Most of them proceed without issue. The photograph matches. The form is complete. The system records it as verified. The file moves to the next stage of processing. By the end of my shift, I rarely have any flags or concerns to report. This is the rhythm of the work. This is what my days consist of. But on a Tuesday morning in March, something changed. I was processing a batch of donation materials from a closed psychiatric facility upstate. The facility had shut down in 1994. The building had been sold. The patients had been transferred or released. The staff had been dispersed to other institutions or other careers. Now, 30 years later, the remaining records were being transferred to our archive for long-term preservation. Nothing unusual about that. We receive donation materials regularly. The work is straightforward. I've done this thousands of times before. The batch was organized in chronological order. Photographs from 1987 in the first box. Admission forms and discharge notes accompanying each image. Some of the photographs were more degraded than others. Some of them were water damaged or faded. But they were all legible. They were all identifiable. They were all suitable for archival preservation. I was working through the batch methodically, marking each photograph as verified, moving the forms through the cataloging system. By early afternoon, I had processed about half of the 1987 materials. Everything was proceeding normally. Then I came to a photograph that made me pause. It was in a folder labeled with a case number. The back of the photograph had handwritten documentation. Admission, June 3rd. It is 1987. The image showed a man in his late 30s, photographed from the shoulders up, wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown. Black and white photograph. Standard institutional format. Neutral background. The subject was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was neither happy nor sad, simply present, simply real. I pulled the corresponding intake form from the folder. The form was dated June 3rd, 1987. All required information was present. Date of admission, name of facility, reason for admission, attending physician, patient name. I looked at the patient name. My breath caught. The name on the form was my name, my full name, the exact name on my driver's license, my employment contract, my bank account, my entire identity. I set the photograph down on my desk. I picked it up again. I looked at the face more carefully. It wasn't me. It wasn't any version of me I recognized. The man was older than I currently am. I'm 45 years old, and this man appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. But the facial structure was similar in the way that family members resemble each other. The nose had a similar shape. The distance between the eyes was comparable. The general proportions of the face were aligned. But I had never been this man. I had never looked like this. I had no memory of being photographed by this institution. I had no memory of ever being admitted to a psychiatric facility. I turned the form over. There, in handwriting that matched the back of the photograph, was my address. Not an address I'd lived at recently, but my current address. The one where my mail is delivered. You're the one where I live now. And my phone number, my current phone number. I set both the photograph and the form down on my desk. I sat there for several minutes without moving. Around me, the office continued its normal routine. My colleagues moved between workstations. Printers hummed. The ventilation system circulated the climate-controlled air. Everything was exactly as it always was. But something had fundamentally changed in my perception of the world. I picked up the photograph again. I studied the face. I tried to see myself in it. I tried to find some connection between this image and my own reflection. There was a resemblance, but it was not a match. Not the kind of match that protocol requires. The photograph was of someone else, someone who happened to look similar to me, someone who happened to have my name, each as someone who happened to have my address. According to the protocol, I should have filed this in the system immediately. I should have verified it as a match and moved it through the cataloging process. This is what I do. This is what the system requires. But I didn't. Instead, I made a copy of both the photograph and the form using the document scanner at my workstation. I placed the copies in a separate folder. I labeled it Manual Verification, June 3rd, 1987. Requires further review. Then I created a new entry in the system marked with the case number and the notation flagged for manual review, discrepancy detected. This violated protocol. I knew it violated protocol. The system is designed to move documents through processing as quickly and efficiently as possible. Which flags for manual review. are supposed to be filed only when there are clear documented errors, misspelled names, incorrect dates, missing information. Not for subjective concerns about photograph matches or the appearance of personal details on old institutional documents. But I couldn't file this without addressing what I'd found. I continued with the rest of the batch. 43 more photographs from 1987. 43 more intake forms. I processed each one according to standard protocol, verified, cataloged, cleared for filing. But I wasn't paying full attention to the work anymore. Part of my mind was still focused on the photograph and the form, the man in the image, my name on the documentation, the impossible coincidence of it all. By the end of my shift, I had flagged only that single file. Everything else had proceeded normally. I left the office and I drove home. My apartment is small but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that opens onto a living room, bookshelves against one wall, a window that faces the street. I've lived here for 8 years. Before that, I lived in other apartments. Similar arrangements, different locations, but the same basic structure. I made dinner. I ate at my kitchen table. I didn't turn on the television or read anything. I just sat there and thought about the photograph and the form. That evening, I tried to research what I could about the psychiatric facility. Online resources were limited. The facility had been closed for nearly 30 years. Most of its documentation had been digitized over the years, but publicly available information was sparse. The facility was called Meridian Psychiatric Services. It had operated from 1962 to 1994, specializing in what was then called adjustment disorder and identity clarification. I wasn't sure what that meant. The terminology seemed vague and antiquated. I assumed it was some kind of general psychiatric treatment, something that might have addressed anxiety, depression, or other common mental health concerns. I tried searching for my own name in connection with the facility. Nothing came up. No records, no mentions, no trace that I had ever been admitted there. I searched for the address that appeared on the form. It was a real address. It was an actual location. But when I looked at the street view, it showed an office building, not a residence. It appeared to be a commercial address. I searched for my own address on the form. In doubts, that was my current address, the place where I lived now. But in 1987, I was 5 years old. I was living with my parents in a different state. I had no reason to be on a psychiatric facility's intake form. I had no reason to have a residential address listed on documentation from that time period. The contradictions piled up. The impossibilities stacked against each other like layers of sediment. I closed my laptop and I went to bed. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, before my supervisor checked in, before the regular workflow started. I accessed the donation materials database and I pulled up the complete file for the 1987 Meridian Psychiatric batch. There were 234 intake photographs in the donation. I cross-referenced the names against the system. 17 of them matched current employees at the Department of Records Reconciliation, including mine. I ran the cross-reference again to verify. Same result, 17 matches. 17 photographs from 1987, all with the names of people who currently worked in this building. All with addresses and phone numbers that were either current or had changed only slightly over the decades. One of the names was Marcus. He worked in the cataloging section. I knew Marcus. We ate lunch together sometimes. We'd worked in the same office for the past 6 years. Another name was Sarah. She was on my verification team. We saw each other every day. We attended the same department meetings. We had casual conversations about weekend plans and office politics. Another name was David. David worked in records management, and I had never spoken to him directly, but I'd seen him in hallways and break rooms. There were 14 other names, 14 other people whose photographs appeared in the 1987 intake materials from Meridian Psychiatric Services. 14 other people who currently worked at the Department of Records Reconciliation. I printed the list. I put it in a folder. I placed the folder in my desk drawer. Then I returned to my normal work. I was terrified, but I was also functioning. And that was the strange thing about it. I could be processing the fear internally while maintaining my external performance. I could be terrified and also be professionally competent. By 10 a.m., I had an email from my supervisor, Patricia. She wanted to see me in her office. Patricia is the director of intake verification. She's been with the department for 18 years. She's competent and by the book, and doesn't ask questions about decisions made by the central system. When things happen at the departmental level, she treats them as if they were handed down from above, rather than made by real people within the organization. That's how bureaucracy works at a certain level. Individual decisions become attributed to the system. Responsibility becomes distributed across multiple layers until no single person is accountable. I walked to her office on the second floor. The office had a window. It was larger than my workstation. It was organized but not cluttered. Patricia was sitting behind her desk, looking at her computer monitor. She didn't look up immediately when I entered. "You flagged 17 photographs from the 1987 Meridian batch," she said. "No," I said. "I flagged one." "The system shows 17 flags in manual verification," she said. "All from the same batch, all created within the last hour." I sat down in the chair across from her desk. "I only flagged one photograph," I said. "The one with my name on it." Patricia looked up from her monitor. "The system shows 17 flags in manual verification," she said again, as if repetition might change my response. "All of them are photographs of current department staff." She turned her monitor around to show me the screen. She was right. The system was displaying 17 manual verification flags. Each one corresponded to a name. Each name was someone I recognized, people I worked with, people I passed in the hallways, people whose faces I saw every day. "I only flagged one," I said. "The one with my name." The other 16, Jackie. "I don't know how they got flagged. I didn't do that." "The system logged all 17 flags at 6:47 a.m., Patricia said. "All from the same batch, all created simultaneously. The activity log shows the IP address of your workstation and your user credentials." "Someone used my terminal," I said. "Someone accessed my credentials." "Is that likely?" Patricia asked. "The security protocol requires your password to access the system. Your password is personal information. Is it likely that someone else would have your password and would use your workstation without your knowledge?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. I don't know." Patricia closed her monitor. "The protocol is clear," she said. "Any photograph that cannot be immediately verified must go through manual review within 48 hours. The system has now flagged 17 photographs that require verification. We have 48 hours to verify all of them or remove the flags and proceed to standard catalog." "What if they're wrong?" I asked. What if the documentation doesn't match the photographs? Then we make corrections and proceed, Patricia said. That's the standard protocol. We note the discrepancy, we update the files to reflect the correction, and we move forward. But these aren't simple errors, I said. These are photographs of people who work here from 1987, with documentation showing their current addresses and phone numbers. That doesn't make sense. Patricia was quiet for a moment. It makes sense in one particular way, she said. It makes sense if the documentation is correct. If these individuals were admitted to Meridian Psychiatric Services in 1987. If their current contact information was documented at the time of their admission. If everything in the file is accurate and complete. But that's impossible, I said. I'm 45 years old. In 1987, I was 5 years old. I was living with my parents. I was nowhere near a psychiatric facility. Are you certain about that? Patricia asked. Yes, I said. I'm certain. I was in kindergarten. I have school records. I have photographs from that time. I have clear memories of my childhood. Patricia opened her monitor again. Your job is to verify that photographs match their documentation, she said. Not to judge the plausibility of the documentation itself. Not to investigate whether the information is accurate. Your job is to confirm that the image corresponds to the form, that the names align, that the dates are present, that all required information is complete. But I started. The protocol is clear, Patricia said. I want you to pull up all 17 files, check each photograph against the corresponding intake documentation. Verify that all information is complete and consistent. If there are any discrepancies between the image and the documentation, such as the name on the form not matching the name on the back of the photograph, or the admission date being different in different places, then note those discrepancies. If there are no discrepancies, all files should proceed to standard catalog by end of business tomorrow. And if the discrepancies are about the plausibility of the documentation, I asked, what if the documentation claims something that can't possibly be true? Then you're not qualified to make that judgment, Patricia said. That judgment would require investigation into historical records, personal documents, and other materials that are outside the scope of your position. Your job is to verify the internal consistency of the file. That's what I need you to do. She gestured toward the door. I need this resolved by tomorrow end of business, she said. Either clear all 17 files for standard catalog or formally flag them for investigation. But the flags need to be resolved. Do you understand? I understand, I said. I left her office. Part 2. The files. I returned to my desk, and I pulled up all 17 files on my computer. Each one showed an intake photograph from 1987. Each one showed the name of a current department employee. Each one showed an address and phone number that matched their current information or close variations of it. Each one contained admission dates, medical histories, treatment notes, physician assessments. I started with my own file. The photograph was the same one I had found that morning. The man in the photograph was someone I didn't recognize, but the documentation said it was me. The form said I had been admitted on June 3rd, 1987, at Meridian Psychiatric Services, with a diagnosis of identity uncertainty. The treatment notes indicated a 30-day inpatient program. The attending physician was listed as Dr. Marcus Reeves. The discharge note dated July 3rd, 1987 stated, patient successfully completed adjustment protocol. Released to community care. Prognosis. Good. I had no memory of this. I had No recollection of ever being in a psychiatric facility. I had no medical records that reference this admission. I'd never mentioned it to anyone. I didn't remember it, but the documentation was there. It was complete. It was dated. It was professional. It appeared to be authentic. I opened the next file. It was for Marcus Chen, who works in the cataloging section. His photograph was similar to mine. A man in his late 30s, in what appeared to be a hospital gown, with a neutral expression. The documentation was nearly identical to mine. Admitted June 10th, 1987. Diagnosis, identity displacement. Released July 10th, 1987. Attending physician, Dr. Rebecca Chen. I opened another file. Sarah Williamson from the verification team. Admitted June 17th, 1987. Each diagnosed with continuity disturbance. Released July 17th, 1987. Every photograph, every piece of documentation, every person was a current department employee, and every single one was from June or July 1987, approximately 35 years ago. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing all 17 files. Each one followed the same pattern. Each one showed an individual admitted to Meridian Psychiatric Services in 1987. Each one showed a diagnosis related to identity issues. Identity uncertainty, identity displacement, continuity disturbance, identity clarification disorder, persistent self-doubt syndrome, identity integration crisis. Each one showed a 30-day treatment program. Each one showed release in good condition. Each one showed a current address and phone number that corresponded to where these individuals lived now, or at least where they lived currently in the database. I checked my own birth certificate. I was born in 1982. In June 1987, I would have been 5 years old. I was in kindergarten. My parents were alive and could confirm that I was with them. I have school records from that time. I have photographs from my childhood. I have evidence of my continuous existence in my home state with my family. Yet the documentation in the archives said I had been admitted to a psychiatric facility in a different state during that same time period. The contradiction was complete. It was absolute. It was undeniable. I made a folder on my personal computer. I labeled it Research Confidential. I copied the 17 files to that folder. I encrypted the folder with a password. I told no one that I'd done this. That evening, I called my mother. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to be very honest with me about the answer. Of course, she said. In June 1987, were you ever away from home for an extended period? No, she said. Why? Do you remember me going to any kind of medical facility that year? Any hospital or treatment center? No, she said. You were fine that year. You were healthy. You were in school. What is this about? I didn't tell her. I told her it was just something that came up at work and I was sorting it out. She accepted that and we moved on to talking about other things. By the end of the conversation, she seemed to have forgotten that I had asked the question. The next morning, I made phone calls to 8 of the 17 employees whose names appeared on the flags. I called them individually. I told them I was conducting a verification audit. I asked them if they had any knowledge of being admitted to a psychiatric facility in 1987. I asked them if they had any records from that time period that might help explain some administrative discrepancies we had found in the donation batch. Each one said the same thing. They had no memory of being admitted to any psychiatric facility. They had no knowledge of such documentation. They had no explanation for how their names and addresses appeared on 1987 intake forms. Some of them were disturbed by the information, others were skeptical. One of them, Robert, from the archive team, became angry and demanded to know why I was making accusations about his medical history. I explained that I wasn't making accusations, I was trying to understand a discrepancy in the system. He told me to drop it. He told me it was none of my business and that I should focus on my own work. The 8th person I called was Marcus. I asked him directly about the file. "There's no way," he said. "I've never been to that place. I would remember something like that." "The documentation has your name on it," I said. "Your address, your phone number." "Someone made a mistake," he said. "Or someone's playing a prank. I don't know. But I wasn't admitted to any psychiatric facility." "Are you certain?" I asked. "I'm absolutely certain," he said. "I've never been hospitalized, except when I had my appendix removed in 2003. I would definitely remember being admitted to a psychiatric facility. By the end of the business day on Wednesday, I had less than 20 hours before the system would require resolution of the flags. I had to make a decision about what to do with the files. I could continue investigating. I could push back against Patricia. I could escalate the concern to whoever Patricia answered to. I could try to expose what appeared to be a massive administrative error, or worse, some kind of coordinated deception. Or I could do what I was supposed to do. I could verify the files, mark them as complete and consistent, and move them through the system to cataloging. I could pretend that I hadn't noticed the impossible contradictions. I could accept that this was not my problem to solve. That evening I drove north toward Meridian Psychiatric Services. The facility had closed in 1994, but the building still existed. It had been converted into a mixed-use property with office space and some residential units. Because the location was about 2 hours north of the city in a smaller town that I'd never visited before. I drove for 2 hours. The landscape gradually shifted from urban to suburban to rural. The buildings became older. The streets became quieter. The sense of the city faded away. The building appeared suddenly as I rounded a curve in the road. It was older than I expected. It was a converted institutional structure, originally built in the 1950s with multiple wings and a central courtyard. The architecture suggested a hospital or similar large-scale facility. The current property management company had made minimal modifications to the exterior. The building was still clearly recognizable as an institutional structure, even though it was now used for offices and residential units. I parked in the parking lot, and I looked at the structure for a while. I was looking for something that would feel familiar, something that would trigger a memory or create a sense of recognition, but I felt nothing. The building was just a building. It didn't mean anything to me. It didn't evoke any emotional response or sense of recognition. But the fact that I felt nothing was itself significant. The absence of recognition was notable. I got out of the car and I walked toward the main entrance. The building had been divided into sections. The ground floor housed commercial office space. A sign in the lobby directed residents to elevator access on the left side. Another sign directed businesses to an elevator on the right side. I approached the information desk. A receptionist was sitting there, wearing a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm doing historical research," I said, "on the psychiatric facility that used to operate in this building, Meridian Psychiatric Services. I was wondering if you had any information or archives from that time period." That was a long time ago, the receptionist said. This building was purchased in 1995, right after the facility closed. We don't have any materials from the previous operation. Do you know what happened to the records? I asked. Where the documentation went? I believe most of it was transferred to various state agencies, she said. Some of it went to a records archive. I'm not sure of the specifics. That's all before my time here. Is there a basement? I asked. Any kind of storage or archival space that might have older materials? There's a basement, she said, but it's restricted to authorized personnel only. It's being used for storage and maintenance access. I thanked her and I left the office. I walked through the building. The hallways were different from what I had expected. I had no idea what to expect. But something about the current configuration didn't feel right. The walls were painted a neutral beige. The floors were recently polished. The lighting was modern and bright. If this had been a psychiatric facility, all of those elements had been removed or updated. I found a door marked Archive Storage Access in the basement level. It was locked. A sign indicated that access was restricted to authorized personnel only. I tried the door anyway. It was locked. No amount of pushing or pulling would change that. I stood there for a moment, looking at the locked door, and then I turned around and I left the building. I drove back to the city. It was late when I arrived at my apartment. I was exhausted from the drive and from the stress of what I had been trying to do. I made some coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at my laptop. I had to make a decision by end of business tomorrow. I had to either clear the 17 files for cataloging or flag them for investigation. I spent the night researching Meridian Psychiatric Services. I looked for news articles. I searched for historical information. I tried to find any documentation about the facility's closing or the disposition of its records. What I found was remarkably little. The facility had closed in 1994. The building had been sold, and the staff had been dispersed. The patients had been transferred or released, but there was almost no public documentation about why the facility had closed or what had happened to its records. There was one article from a state psychiatric review board from 1995 discussing the closure and indicating that records had been transferred to the state archives. But that was the extent of what I could find. The state archive website had no public listing of Meridian materials. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted and no closer to understanding what was happening. I went to bed. Part 3. The Decision. When I arrived at the office on Monday morning, I was prepared to make my decision. Patricia was waiting for me at my desk. She handed me a printout of the system timeline showing when all 17 flags had been created. You need to resolve these today, she said. I know, I said. Either clear them for standard catalog or formally flag them for investigation, she said. But the flags need to be resolved by 5 p.m. today. That's the deadline. I understand, I said. She left me at my desk. I had spent the weekend thinking about this. I had thought about what would happen if I flagged all 17 files for investigation. The investigation would go to the Central Records Office. It would be reviewed by people higher in the administrative chain. It would probably result in questions about how the files had been mishandled or why they had been flagged in the first place. It would probably result in questions about me. It would probably result in someone asking how I had accessed files that contained personal health information about my colleagues and whether I had discussed those files with anyone else. If I escalated this, I would be escalating a problem that could not be easily solved. I would be creating a situation that might spiral in directions I couldn't control, or I could clear all 17 files for catalog. I could mark them as verified and complete. I could move them through the system as if everything was correct. I could pretend that I had not found my own name on documentation from before I was capable of being admitted to a psychiatric facility. I could accept that somehow, impossibly, these files existed and contained what they claimed to contain. I could choose the system over the truth. By mid-afternoon, I had made my decision, and I opened each of the 17 files individually. I reviewed the documentation one more time. I confirmed that all information was present and complete. I confirmed that the photograph and the form matched. That is, they corresponded to the same case number and the same individual, regardless of the temporal or logical impossibilities involved. Then I clicked the verification checkbox for each one. I marked each file as verified, proceed to standard catalog. The system logged each clearance. The files moved out of manual verification and into the standard processing pipeline. By 4:47 p.m., all 17 files had been cataloged and archived. I had made a decision. I had chosen the system over the truth. I had chosen to let the contradiction pass through the verification process unchallenged. But something had changed. When I made that decision, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of the world. I had crossed a line. I had participated in the system's logic rather than resisting it. I had allowed an impossible thing to become official record. That night, I dreamed of the man in the photograph of myself that was not myself. In the dream, he was walking through hallways. The hallways were changing shape around him. Corridors lengthened and shortened. Doorways appeared and disappeared. He was moving through the building with certainty, as if he knew where he was going and what he was supposed to do. When I woke up, I couldn't quite remember the dream, but the feeling of it remained. A sense of wrongness. A sense of shifting reality. A sense that the building itself was somehow unstable. Our Part 4, Disturbances. The first anomaly appeared on Thursday. I had walked down the third-floor corridor every day for 11 years. The corridor connected the main verification office to the archive storage area. The walk took about 3 minutes. I could navigate it with my eyes closed. I knew exactly how many doors opened onto the corridor. I knew the exact pattern of offices and windows. There were 12 office doors on the left side of the corridor, 8 windows on the right side. This was the configuration I'd internalized. This was the map that existed in my mind. On Thursday morning, I counted the doors. 13. I stopped walking and I recounted. 13 office doors on the left side. Definitely 13. The extra door was positioned between the break room and the corner office. It was painted the same color as the other doors. It had the same style of frame and handle. It looked like it had always been there, but it hadn't. I was certain of that. I would have noticed an extra door. I would have noticed a change in the corridor layout. I stood in front of the extra door for several minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I walked back toward the main office, and I approached Marcus. "Did they add a new office in the third-floor corridor?" I asked. "No," Marcus said, not looking up from his work. "There's an extra door there," I said. "On the left side between the break room and the corner office." Marcus put down his pen. He looked at me with an expression that suggested mild annoyance, I walk that corridor every day, he said. I would have noticed if there was a new door. Walk down there with me, I said. I'll show you. Marcus sighed, but he got up, and we walked to the corridor together. I pointed to the space where I had seen the extra door. Right here, I said. This is where it was. I see 12 doors, Marcus said. Same as always. You're not seeing something I'm not seeing. But I had counted 13 just minutes ago. I had stood in front of the extra door. I had looked at it directly. Maybe I miscounted, I said. Maybe you did, Marcus said. We walked back to the main office. I felt something shift inside me. A sense of wrongness. A sense that what I was experiencing was not trustworthy. That my perception might be unreliable. The next anomaly appeared on Friday. I found a note on my desk. It was handwritten on archive paper. It said, "You should have flagged them." The handwriting was neat and careful. The paper was archive standard, the kind we used for all internal notes and communications. But I didn't recognize the handwriting. It wasn't my handwriting. It wasn't Patricia's handwriting. I didn't know whose handwriting it was. I asked everyone around me if they had left a note on my desk. No one claimed responsibility. Some of them seemed genuinely confused by the question. Others seemed to be lying, though I couldn't determine why they would be lying about something so trivial. I kept the note in my desk drawer. I didn't throw it away. I didn't show it to anyone. I just kept it as evidence of something I didn't understand. The note's accusation occupied my thoughts for the rest of the day. You should have flagged them. The suggestion was that I'd made the wrong decision, that I should have pursued the investigation rather than clearing the files for catalog. But what would have happened if I'd flagged them? What would have come from escalating the contradiction? Would it have led to truth? Or would it have led to consequences that I wasn't prepared for? The note suggested that I had made a mistake. The note suggested that someone knew about my decision and my reasoning and disagreed with the choice I had made. But who would leave such a note? And how would they know about my internal process of deliberation? On Monday morning, I came to work and found that my access badge had been deactivated. I tried to enter the building using my badge. The door wouldn't unlock. I had been using the same badge for 11 years. It had worked every morning. But on this morning, it had stopped working. I went to the guest entrance and I checked in with security. The security officer examined my badge. He scanned it. He looked at his computer screen. "It should be active," he said. "Let me check with your office." He called Patricia. When he hung up, he told me my badge should be fine. He said to try the main entrance again. I tried the main entrance. This time, the door unlocked without any issue. I felt something cold move through my chest. The badge had stopped working, and then it had started working again. But I hadn't done anything. I hadn't renewed it or updated it or done anything that would have caused it to malfunction and then correct itself. Later that day, I tested my badge on every door in the building. Every door unlocked when I held the badge to the reader. The system responded correctly. The badge was functioning normally. But I'd experienced that moment where it didn't work. That moment of rejection, that moment where the system had refused to accept my credentials. When I got to my desk, I found a notification in my email. I had no files assigned to me. All of my work queue had been redistributed. My active projects had been reassigned to other verification officers. I was told by Patricia that I should report to the Human Resources office on the second floor. I went upstairs to the HR office. A woman named Ellen was waiting for me. She told me that my position was being reorganized. What does that mean? I asked. We're consolidating several verification roles, she said. Your position is being eliminated. However, yes, we have an opportunity for you in the archive division. You would be transferring to document preservation. The work would be similar, but with a focus on maintaining historical records rather than on intake verification. I wasn't told about any reorganization, I said. It was communicated to your supervisor last week, Ellen said. No, I said. That didn't happen. I haven't been told about anything. Ellen pulled up a document on her computer. Here's the notice sent to your supervisor on March 15th, she said. That's 8 days ago. It indicates the proposed reorganization and mentions your transfer to the archive division. I checked the calendar. Today was March 23rd. 8 days ago would be March 15th. But Patricia hadn't mentioned any reorganization, or she had said nothing about my position being consolidated or about a transfer being proposed. I want to stay in verification, I said. That's not an option, Ellen said. Your position has been consolidated. We can offer you the transfer to archive, or we can terminate your employment. What would you prefer? I understood the choice I was being presented with. Accept the transfer or lose my job. There was no third option. There was no negotiation. I'll accept the transfer, I said. Excellent, Ellen said. You can begin the transition next Monday. You'll be working in the archive division document preservation section. Your supervisor there will be Michael Torres. He's expecting you. I left the HR office feeling like something had been taken from me. I had worked in verification for 11 years. It was the work I knew. It was the structure that gave shape to my days. And now I was being reassigned to a different division, different work, different supervisor. Was this because I had flagged the 17 files? Was this punishment for asking questions? Or was this simply what happened when you had a record of not being fully compliant with the system? Part 5. The Archive Division. I spent the next week moving from the verification section to the Archive Division. My new desk was on the lower level of the warehouse, near the long-term storage systems. My new responsibilities involved maintaining storage systems and organizing incoming donations. It was similar to my previous work in structure, but different in focus. Instead of verifying individual photographs against intake forms, I was now overseeing the preservation of entire document collections. I was managing humidity and temperature controls. I was cataloging materials as they entered the archive. I was creating access systems and maintenance schedules. It was still methodical work. It still required attention to detail, but the scope had shifted. I was now working with thousands of documents rather than individual cases. I was also surrounded by photographs now. Tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. Black and white photographs dating back decades. Intake photos from closed institutions. Documentation photos from defunct organizations. Photographs that had been processed through the verification system and cataloged for preservation. On my first day in the archive division, I noticed something. Some of the photographs looked like people I knew, not exactly like people I knew. Not recognizable as specific individuals, but similar. Similar enough that I would do a double take. Similar enough to create a moment of disorientation. I pulled a photograph at random from a shelf. It showed a man in his 50s, wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown. The photograph was from the 1970s. The face was unfamiliar, but the structure was similar to someone I had seen before. Similar to Robert, perhaps, or similar to David, or similar to someone whose face I had seen in a hallway or break room. I pulled another photograph, a woman in her 40s, also in a hospital gown, also from an institutional setting. This one looked similar to someone from the verification team, maybe similar to Jennifer. I began organizing the photographs by decade. I started pulling all the photographs from the 1980s. I sorted them by institution. I was looking for some kind of pattern. What I found was that Meridian Psychiatric Services had admitted over 3,000 individuals between 1962 and 1994. The intake photographs from 1987 alone numbered over 400. The facility's records had been donated to our archive in segments, but the 1987 materials had been the most recent donation. I pulled all 400 photographs from 1987. I looked at each one carefully. In the batch, I found 43 photographs that could potentially match current department employees. Not exact matches, not perfect reproductions, but similar enough to warrant concern. Similar enough that I couldn't rule out the possibility that they were the same people, just decades younger. But similar enough that if someone showed me one of these photographs and asked me who it was, I would say, that looks like someone I work with. Before I stopped myself and said, actually, I have no idea. I made a list of the 43 names from the intake forms. Then I cross-referenced them against the current department roster. 38 of them were current employees of the Department of Records Reconciliation. The other 5 had worked at the department within the last 10 years and were no longer employed. The system had hired them all. The department had recruited them all. Every single person whose name appeared on those 1987 intake forms from Meridian Psychiatric Services was now employed by this office, or had been employed, or was currently employed. All 38 of them were people I recognized, and people I worked with every day, people whose names I knew, people whose faces I passed in hallways, people whose voices I heard in meetings. All of them had completed an identity clarification program at Meridian Psychiatric Services in 1987. And all of them had been transferred to work in either archive preservation or intake verification. These were the only 2 divisions where we did systematic work with documentation. These were the only 2 divisions where workers processed materials according to protocol. These were the only 2 divisions where the work required a specific kind of attention and precision. I made a copy of the list. I put it in an envelope. I sealed it. I placed it in my desk drawer. Then I made a decision. I was going to contact the Human Resources Department and report what I had found. But before I could do that, I received an email from Patricia. The email said, "Please report to the director's office immediately." The director's office was on the 5th floor. I had never been there before. The 5th floor was mostly empty. It contained a few administrative offices and the director's suite. Most staff never went up there. The building's operational work happened on the lower floors. I took the elevator up. The director's office was at the end of a hallway. A small plaque on the door indicated the office belonged to Margaret Chen, director. I had never met Margaret Chen. I had never heard her speak. I had never attended a meeting where she was present. But apparently she was the highest ranking person in the department. Apparently she was the person who made decisions about reorganization and personnel and policy. I knocked on the door. "Come in," she said. I entered the office. The office was smaller than I expected. It was neat and organized. There was a desk. There were bookshelves. There was a window that looked out over the warehouse. Margaret Chen was sitting behind her desk, looking at a file. She didn't look up immediately when I entered. "Sit down," she said. I sat down in the chair across from her desk. She continued reading the file for another 30 seconds. Then she looked up at me. "I understand you've been researching historical intake materials," she said. "I've been working in the archive division," I said. "I'm organizing documents from donation batches." "You've been specifically researching intake materials from Meridian Psychiatric Services," she said. "You've been making cross-references to current employees. Reese, you've been creating lists. You've been consolidating information." I didn't respond. "The records that you've been accessing are not public materials," she said. "They are restricted materials. They contain sensitive personal health information. You do not have clearance to research those records in the way you have been researching them." "I was just trying to understand a discrepancy," I said. "There is no discrepancy," she said. "The records are complete and accurate. They have been verified and cataloged. They are closed." "But the information," I started, "is not your concern," she said. "You are an employee of this department. Your job is to process documents according to protocol. Your job is not to investigate the content of those documents or to create relationships between them that are not indicated in the standard documentation." I sat there in silence for a moment. Margaret Chen was regarding me with an expression that was neither hostile nor sympathetic. It was neutral, professional. The expression of someone who was conducting official business. "I need to understand what's happening," I said. Margaret closed the file. She folded her hands. "What's happening," she said, "is that you are being presented with an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" I asked. "An opportunity to clarify your identity," she said. I looked at her. "You've been working in this department for 11 years, she continued. "You've been processing documents. You've been moving information through systems. You've been participating in the work of record reconciliation. But you've never truly understood the purpose of the work. You've never truly understood what you are a part of." "I understand the purpose of my job," I said. "Do you?" she asked. "Because someone who understood the purpose of record reconciliation would not be creating unauthorized lists. Someone who understood it would not be attempting to expose relationships that should not be exposed. Someone who understood it would not be threatening the stability of the system." "I'm not threatening anything," I said. "I'm just trying to make sense of what I found." "What you found," Margaret said, "is a record of a process that has been ongoing for many years, a process that the department facilitates and maintains, a process that is essential to the functioning of society." "What process?" I asked. "The process of identity clarification," she said. "The process of helping individuals who are experiencing identity disturbance to stabilize their sense of self through structured adjustment programming. The process of integrating those individuals into the systems where their corrected identity can be maintained and verified." I understood what she was saying, but it didn't make sense. "The people in those files," I said, "they're not sick. They're not experiencing identity disturbance. They're working here. They're functioning normally." "Are they?" Margaret asked. "Or are they functioning exactly as they were designed to function?" She opened the file again. She turned it around so I could see it was my employment file. It showed my hire date. It's my position history, my reviews. All of it was standard. All of it was what I would expect. But at the bottom of the file was a photograph. It was the same photograph from the 1987 intake documentation. The man in the hospital gown. "That's not me," I said. That's the person you were, she said. Or the person you had been before the clarification, before the adjustment, before the integration. I don't understand, I said. I know you don't, she said, but you will. In time, you will understand. But for now, I need you to understand one thing. The lists you created, the cross-references you made, the connections you discovered, those are not to be shared with anyone. Those are not to be discussed. Those are not to leave this office. Do you understand? What if they're important? I asked. They are important, she said. That's exactly why they cannot leave this office. She closed the file. You will return to your work in the archive division, she said. You will continue organizing documentation as you have been. You will continue processing donations as assigned. You will not conduct any additional research into intake materials from Meridian Psychiatric Services or any other facility. You will not create additional cross-references or lists. You will not discuss what you have found with any other employee of this department. In exchange for your cooperation, you will remain employed. You will receive your regular salary. You will continue to have access to the building and the systems. Do you understand? What if I don't agree? I asked. Then you will be terminated, she said. Your employment will be ended. Your access will be revoked. You will no longer be part of the system. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering what you found in those files and whether you made the right choice. You will spend the rest of your life haunted by partial knowledge. I understood what she was saying. I understood that this was not a negotiation. This was a statement of fact. This was how the system functioned. This was how it protected itself. I understand, I said. Good, Margaret said. You're dismissed. I stood up. I left her office. I took the elevator back down to the archive division. Part 6. The Integration. I spent the next 4 weeks organizing documents and processing donations exactly as I was supposed to. I did not conduct any additional research. I did not create any additional lists. I did not discuss what I had found with anyone. I didn't contact the Human Resources Department. I didn't attempt to expose what I had discovered. I worked in the archive division. I maintained the storage systems. I cataloged incoming materials. I performed my job according to protocol. But I began to notice more things. I noticed that the building seemed to be changing in subtle ways. The corridors were slightly different lengths. The stairwells led to different numbers of floors, depending on which one you used. The windows showed views that didn't quite align with the external geography. When I attempted to describe these observations to anyone else, they would look at me with an expression of confusion or mild concern. They would tell me that the building was the same as always. They would suggest that I was tired or stressed. But I wasn't stressed. Or I was. But not in the way they meant. I was stressed by the realization that my perception of the building was becoming increasingly unreliable. I noticed that the other employees seemed to move through the building with a kind of certainty that I didn't share. They knew where they were going. They knew where things were. They didn't question anything. They didn't show any sign of noticing the changes that seemed obvious to me. I noticed that the same faces appeared in different contexts. An employee from, verification would appear doing archive work. An employee from cataloging would appear doing something else entirely. But when I checked the employee directory, each person only had one job. They didn't have multiple roles. They didn't work in different divisions, yet I would see them doing different kinds of work. I noticed that my own memories were becoming less stable. I would remember events from my life, but the details would shift. I would remember my parents, but I couldn't quite see their faces. I would remember my childhood home, but I couldn't quite locate it in space. I would remember my early years in this job, but the timeline seemed wrong. Had I been hired 11 years ago? Or had it been 10 years? Or 12? The memory was there, but it felt unstable. It felt like it might be slipping away. I began to wonder if the man in the 1987 photograph was actually me. Not metaphorically, actually. If I had been admitted to Meridian Psychiatric Services in 1987. If the clarification process had worked. If the integration had already happened before I had any awareness of it. If the version of me that existed now was not the original version, but a continuation or an echo or a replacement, and if that was true, then I would have no way of knowing it. My memories would be consistent with the narrative. I would have no evidence of discontinuity. I would simply be a person who believed they had continuous existence when in fact they had been created or clarified or replaced at some point in the past. And if that was true, then every other employee in this building was probably experiencing the same thing. We were all replacements, all of us. All 38 of us from the 1987 batch. Maybe even more. Maybe the other 5 who had left the department and gone elsewhere. Maybe many others in the organization who had been clarified and integrated at different times. We had been clarified. We had been adjusted. We had been integrated into the system, and now the system was maintaining us exactly as it maintained the records, with accuracy, with consistency, with completeness. On Friday of the 4th week, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a new personnel file. It was mine, but it was different from the previous version. My hire date was now listed as June 3rd, 1987. My employment history showed continuous service from that date to the present. It showed no gaps. It showed promotions and transfers and changes in position, all consistent with a 35-year tenure at the department. My position was listed as Archive Preservation Specialist, Perpetual. The document was dated today, March 23rd. I read the file multiple times, trying to understand what it meant. Then I filed it in the appropriate folder. I returned to my work. I organized the documents. I processed the donations. I maintained the integrity of the archive. And I stopped wondering if this was real. Because whether it was real or whether it wasn't real, the distinction no longer mattered. The system had clarified me. The system had adjusted me. The system had integrated me. And I was functioning exactly as I was supposed to function. Part 7. The continuation. The next batch of donation materials arrived on Monday. Among them was a box labeled Admission Materials 2019. I opened it. Inside were intake photographs from a psychiatric facility that had closed earlier this year. The facility had been located in a different state. Its records had been transferred to our archive for preservation, exactly as the Meridian materials had been transferred 30 years ago, when the photographs showed people in their late 30s and early 40s. They looked very similar to people I recognized from the current department roster. I checked the intake forms. 3 of them were already employed by the Department of Records Reconciliation. They had been hired within the last 2 years. 5 more matched the descriptions of people who had been hired in the last 6 months. I placed the batch on the processing queue. The new employees were undergoing the same verification process that I was undergoing. They were being integrated into the same system. They were being assigned to the same divisions: intake verification and archive preservation. They would not yet understand what was happening, They would not yet understand the impossibility of their documentation. In right, they would not yet understand that they had been clarified and adjusted and integrated into a system that had been preserving itself through this exact process for decades. But they would understand eventually, or they wouldn't. They would simply function, they would do their jobs, they would move through the building according to protocol, they would process documents and maintain records and participate in the system's continuation. The system was stable, the system was functional, the system was maintaining itself through perfect continuity. I was part of that system now. I had accepted the integration. I had accepted the clarification. I had accepted my role as a component of something much larger than myself. And by accepting it, I had found a kind of peace. The alternative had been to resist, to fight against the system, to try to expose what I had discovered, but that would have led to termination. That would have led to loss of access. That would have led to permanent disconnection from the network. Instead, I had chosen to remain. I had chosen to function. I had chosen to understand my role and accept it. The building around me was not changing. It was revealing itself, or I was revealing myself to the building. The distinction was no longer clear. I moved through the corridors with the same certainty as the other employees. I knew where I was going. I knew what I was supposed to do. I didn't question anything. The photograph on my desk, the photograph of myself from college, had been joined by other photographs. There were now 3 photographs on my desk. The college photograph, a photograph from my first year at the department, and a photograph from the 1987 intake documentation. I didn't remember putting the other 2 photographs there, but they were there. They belonged. They showed the continuity of my existence, the progression of my identity, the movement from one version of myself to another. Or they showed something else, something that I couldn't quite articulate, something that existed in the space between documentary evidence and lived experience. I continued my work. Days passed, weeks passed, the seasons changed. The archive continued to receive donation materials. The building continued to maintain itself. The system continued to function, and I was part of all of it. I was the system. The system was me. We were indistinguishable. I had been clarified. I had been adjusted. I had been integrated. I was functioning exactly as I was designed to function. I was doing my job. And I would continue doing my job because this was what I had always been designed to do. This was my purpose. This had always been my purpose, and the clarification had finally made that purpose clear. The records were maintained. The documentation was complete. The system was stable. Everything was correct. Everything aligned. I was a component of continuity. I was an instrument of reconciliation. He was at last properly identified.